Tickle the fire waning deep in your heart. Tickle the torch you're touching with. Hand me the word you're leaving out of the script. Mingle with my casting
Hey folks, this is Greg Sparkman with Greg Sparkman Music Production. This is the 1956 Rickenbacker combo Tulip Shape. Super spooky, as you can see. It looks like it's a vampire bat just flown in.
Yes.
And there is no other better person to speak with about this guitar than special guest on the program today, my father, who drove up actually from Kentucky and brought this guitar with him. And this is Farron Sparkman, a Rickenbacker guitar collector over a lifetime, really.
Yes.
But mostly concentrated to the 1980s, I would say, was when I started. When you started.
Yes.
And we're going to get into all of this, how he got into collecting Rickenbackers, and more specifically, this particular guitar and its background and history. So let's start at the top. So as I was a kid growing up, you were collecting guitars long before I came into the picture. But let's start at the very beginning. What turned you on to Rickenbackers specifically? Was it the Beatles when you were a kid? Like, what was your earliest memories of seeing Rickenbackers and your association with them?
Well, I didn't know what they were, but definitely the first time I ever saw one was the Ed Sullivan performance in February of '64 when the Beatles first were on American television. And I was in the same boat as a lot of people that were kind of spellbound and mesmerized by that performance. And so taking it all in, we got to be curious, my age group particularly, about their instruments. Some of them were well-known American brands like Ludwig drums and Gretsch guitars.
Sure.
The others were not familiar to the American audience. Even though Rickenbacker was an American product, we didn't even know that for a while.
Sure.
We thought it might be Rickenbacker and come from Germany or something. I remember that kind of thinking. Mm-hmm. And the Hofner bass did come from Germany. So it was a learning curve. We had to get familiar with where these instruments came from and wanted to know more about them. And it was a difficult thing because the instruments themselves that Rickenbacker made were evolving constantly. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, the one that John Lennon played on that February '64 show had not been produced since 1958.
Oh, wow.
And they only made like 8 of them, period.
Okay.
Later on, they made another version of it, quite different.
Was that the 325?
325.
Right, yeah,
which is a 3/4 size guitar.
Black with a white pickguard.
Yes. Well, his originally was blonde with gold pickguards.
And he had it painted?
He had it painted in 1963.
Oh, interesting. Well, before we progress with the conversation about your specific collection, maybe this is a good point to pause and talk about this guitar and specifically how this very year and make and model was the first exposure that John Lennon had to Rickenbackers, and I'll hold it up as you're kind of telling the story.
Well, the story that I've read many versions of, but basically holding to the fact that Toots Thielemans, I believe is his name, was a jazz player. Mm-hmm. He was a European guy, but he had developed a relationship with the Rickenbacker company in the 50s and ended up kind of endorsing their guitar, and the guitar that he played most often was the Tulip Shape.
Sure.
And there are pictures of him playing it on George Shearing albums. And supposedly John Lennon either saw the George Shearing's band with Toots playing the Rickenbacker or saw a picture of it. But that was what has been passed down as how he first knew about that brand. And then not too long after that, while they were playing in Hamburg, he saw one in a music shop in Hamburg.
Oh, I see. And now I might point out that this is the original paint on this 1956. It has not been refinished at all. Would the one John have seen been black like this one?
I think so.
Okay.
I think the one that Toots had was black.
Do you think that influenced his decision to paint his 325 black?
No. That came from Brian Epstein, who wanted to remodel the whole band's look.
Oh,
with the dark suits and matching color guitars
sure.
And so George had a black Gretsch, and so they was just kind of making some symmetry there, I think.
Yeah.
And at that point, they had to kind of make it real uniform.
Well, it's just really interesting to me that this would have been his first experience with the Rickenbacker.
Yeah.
Because had he not seen this, who knows what guitar he would have picked up, and how would that have changed the sonic thumbprint of rock and roll history had Rickenbackers not been at the forefront of the Beatles sound, so to speak?
They probably would not have survived as a company.
Rickenbacker.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's absolutely, because it's small company.
Yes, absolutely. Small, always American made, and especially before the Beatles produced guitars in really low numbers.
Sure. You had made mention to me that the Rickenbacker name in the early days, there was some sort of confusion on how to pronounce it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because it's still, to this day, commonly mispronounced. The original guy that brought the name was Adolf Rickenbacker from Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And he pronounced it Rickenbacker and spelled it differently. Mm-hmm. It was spelled with Bach being a B-A-C-H. And on his early acoustics and early lap steels that were made in the 30s and 40s, that's how it is spelled on the nameplate. When F.C. Hall, Francis Hall, bought the company in late 1953, he wanted to kind of change that.
Yeah.
To make it more of an American sounding name.
Sure.
So he changed the spelling and changed the pronunciation.
Right.
So ever since they started making electric guitars in the 50s, the modern guitar era began with their first guitars in 1954. They have all been Rickenbacker. Mm-hmm. And, if you call the company, they answer the phone, Rickenbacker.
Sure.
But still, a lot of people think it's Rickenbacker.
Right. That makes sense. So F.C. Francis would be the father of John Hall. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who owns the company to this day and has for decades.
Yes.
Now, Rickenbacker also made the first electric pickups on an instrument. Is that correct?
Yeah, they came out with a thing they called the frying pan because it looked like a frying pan.
Sure.
It's a really crude, primitive instrument, almost like a tiny banjo body with a horseshoe pickup on it.
Right.
And that became their signature pickup from then on. And as a matter of fact, they're still producing a pickup that looks just like that on their bass.
Okay, well, let's continue on with your story. So you had this exposure. You saw the Ed Sullivan Show to the Beatles and saw John Lennon's 325.
Yes.
What would be the next step in the story for you with Rickenbackers?
Well, soon after that, because Francis Hall realized the importance of getting a relationship started with the Beatles, because they were huge.
Sure.
They had so many number one songs on the charts at that time. And so he decided to make sure they got some more instruments in their hands. And not too long after that, he took the very second Rickenbacker 12-string that was ever made and took it to New York and gave it to George Harrison.
Okay.
So soon after that, when the movie Hard Day's Night came out,
sure,
George was playing it in just about every scene. So it was another Rickenbacker to see.
Right.
That they were using. And then there were a few more that I would see on like British television shows. George played a smaller 420 that he bought himself.
Okay.
And John got a replacement for his 1958 325 with a current 325. So quite a few Rickenbackers in the Beatles lineup. And then not too long after that, Francis Hall took a bass to Paul McCartney. And so he continued playing the Hofner at that time on stage, but he was starting to use the Rickenbacker in the recording studio.
Oh, I see. So you started playing guitar yourself, taking lessons at about age 6 or so?
Yeah,
Somewhere
roughly,
between.
yeah. So by the time the Beatles came along, I knew a few chords and was playing guitar.
And your first guitar was an acoustic, a little Sears
Silvertone.
acoustic, Silvertone. What would have been your first electric?
I had a bass first, electric bass, a Hofner.
Oh, that's right.
Because of the Beatles, being a Beatles fan. So I had that in 65.
Did you intend to go on to play bass at that point, or was that just something that was kind of thrown on you?
There was a band that needed a bass player that we were forming, and so I wanted to do that. I had an interest in it. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I experimented with drums. I bought a drum set. I bought a Ludwig drum snare. I started wanting to play guitar too, but by the next year, 66, I'd pretty much settled on the guitar.
So let's back up on the Hofner. That it wasn't the exact Hofner that Paul McCartney was playing,
right?
But we have that very Hofner bass to this very day. You've kept it all these years.
Yeah.
And I think it actually, in some ways, is cooler than the one that Paul was using.
Well, I had to get that one because the violin shape one was in such demand. The one exactly like Paul's, that a lot of stores in the United States
they were sold out.
Couldn't get them.
Yeah.
So this was the exact same bass with a slightly different body shape. It was more of a single cutaway Les Paul shape, but the pickups, the pick guard, the neck, the headstock, the knobs, everything was identical.
You remember the model of that bass, what they called it?
I think they called it a 502.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And the other one was a 501.
So then what would have been your first electric guitar?
The next year I bought a Gretsch 1966 Tennessean.
Hollow body.
Yes, single cutaway, hollow body, kind of a maroon finished.
Two pickups?
Two pickups and a tremolo bar on it, a Bigsby.
So what's the next chapter in the Rickenbacker saga then?
Well, about the same time that I started playing the Gretsch, I got serious about taking guitar lessons.
So obviously you wouldn't begin your collection until probably your late teens, early 20s, and that may have started with Fender Stratocasters before that you got kind of more hardcore into Rickenbackers. And that's probably because of Hendrix.
Yes.
On the chronological musical timeline, you got the Beatles, and then Hendrix came along, and then suddenly you want to get a Marshall stack and a pre-CBS Fender Strat, left-handed, more specifically.
I played two Gretsch guitars and a Gretsch amp, and that was just not going to cut it if you were playing Jimi Hendrix. So I had to make some changes.
Sure.
Yeah, and I went with the Stratocaster, and I went with the Marshall amps for a period of time. And then by the time in the late 70s, I started getting a little interested in some of the country bands and guitar players like Albert Lee and Ray Flack, and I got really interested in that style of Telecaster players.
Right.
And so I sold the Stratocaster and ended up buying a Telecaster was the next change.
But before we get into the, continuing on with the story, we should at least make mention of the fact that you had a couple of pre-CBS Fender Strats and still do.
Yes.
A 57, I think?
Well, the first one I had when I was trying to do the Jimi Hendrix thing was a left-handed pre-CBS Strat.
Right.
That I played upside down just so it would look like his guitar. And then I ended up buying a couple of 1959 Stratocasters, which I still own.
Yes.
Both of which have been refinished.
Right, exactly.
Still original instruments
right.
Other than that.
And then you went on to get a 53 Tele.
Yeah.
Although not originally, right? You had
I had a 77 before that.
Yeah.
And it was stolen, so I had to replace it. So I decided to bite the bullet and try to get the most desirable one at that time was the 53 because so many players played that model for some reason.
Right.
That I admired. So I decided to find one, and I did.
So now you're in your early to mid-20s, and your guitar collection is growing, and at some point in this vicinity, you start turning your attention back over to Rickenbackers.
Yeah, I was playing in a band. I knew that we needed a Rickenbacker 12-string in the band. So that was the first catalyst for me getting into the Rickenbackers, even though I'd been a lifelong fan.
And you joined the band. The band was the Cornerstones, which was a successful... Started out Southern gospel, became, I guess, more just straight up gospel. And you joined in 84, I think it was. So it would have been that time period.
Yeah, I ordered a new one from the factory, Rickenbacker 12-string. And I wanted to get one as close as I could at that time to what George Harrison's looked like.
Sure.
So I was still kind of, influenced by that.
Sure.
And then really soon after that, I decided that it might be a good time to start collecting some of the more rare Rickenbackers because even at that time, compared to Gibsons and Fenders, they were a lot more affordable.
Right.
And most people didn't even know anything about the ones they made in the 50s. And so even though there wasn't that artist association with these instruments in the 50s, which always makes the value more, I was still intrigued by some of the guitars they made in the late 50s. And I thought, that's the ones I want to try to get. So that's what I started working on.
And just to put this into context, in 1984, 85, 86, Rickenbacker that would have come out in the mid to late 50s, we're talking about a 30-some-year-old instrument.
Yeah.
Not extremely old. Now, fast forward to 2023 today, we're talking about a 60-some-year-old instrument.
Yeah.
Back to this one right here.
Yeah. exactly.
You started getting into the combo series, not the one like this that you just pointed out, but the more sophisticated, I guess, for lack of a better term, combos. How many combos did you actually end up with?
Well, the first combo I bought was a 55, and it came out of Texas, and it needed a lot of work. But I got a good deal on it because it needed a lot of work. So I had a 55, and then I bought the another 55 that was great shape, very playable. So I had those two 55 combos, and then I had a 257 combos. One was kind of the ghost blonde, they call it.
Sure.
Kind of a white blonde. And the other was the jade green. So I had 4 of those original style combos.
Right. And then one of them was actually what we call the museum combo.
Yeah.
Which is really unique.
Yeah, that was one that was finished out at the factory, but not sold.
Never went to a person. Or
never went to a store, never left the factory because they just made it. And I guess we're waiting on somebody to order one like that. And it didn't happen. So I was able to obtain that in the late 80s with a certificate of authenticity, and they put it in a new case. And so it's pretty much an unplayed 1957 combo that's brand new.
That's amazing. It's like a brand new guitar that's from 57.
Yeah. So I don't take that out on the road playing it.
Yeah. So what would a guitar, let's just say, what would a Rickenbacker 400 series combo have gone for in the 80s compared to what you see them going for now on Reverb when you were collecting back then?
Well, I would say typically they would go for about $500 or $600 maybe in the 80s.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, at the most. They just didn't turn up because you got to remember there were so few of them produced.
Sure.
And really of that original Tulip style, they only made them in the 400 series. They only made them in 56 and 57. So I ended up getting the one I got for $400.
Okay. You're talking about this Tulip Shape.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the nicer combos, that.
Oh, what would they go for?
Yeah,
like
at that time.
The 600 and 800
Right.
ones?
Yeah.
Not too much more.
Right.
Maybe $700 or $800
Right.
tops.
Interesting. And now on Reverb, have you seen kind of what people...
Yeah, they're anywhere from 13 to 20,000, basically.
Wow.
It's just what they're asking, at least.
Right. Amazing. And that explains why you got out of collecting.
It does. Yeah. It got to be insane.
Yeah. But at one point in the 80s, I want you to share how this actually happened. You were listed in a national publication as being one of the foremost Rickenbacker collectors in the United States. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, and they showed a picture of this guitar too, by the way.
Okay, in that magazine.
Yeah.
Or I think it was a magazine.
It was a booklet.
Okay,
actually.
right.
Yeah.
And what was the name of that booklet? Do you remember?
I think it was called Guitars. That's actually the name of it.
Did somebody come to your home and photograph you, or how did they reach out to you?
They took that picture of the 400 before I had it.
Okay.
Before it was shipped to me.
Sure.
They put my name on there with it, but it's before I actually got it in my hands.
Right. So in the peak of your collection, when this publication came out and you were listed as being one of the top collectors in the U.S., how many vintage Rickenbackers did you have at that point?
I don't know. I had about 8 or 9. I ended up with 11, I think, as of today. But, and I bought and sold some.
Right. Exactly.
So, you don't keep them all.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this Tulip Shape here. So this is a 1956, and which means it's 1 year younger than you.
That's right.
And so it's 67.
Yeah.
And it has a few unusual appointments.
Yes.
To use that term. Why don't I let you hold it here?
Okay.
And you can talk about the fact that it's got one pickup for starters, I guess.
Initially, these guitars were only this model when they introduced it in 56. This was 2 years after they had made the more expensive combos. But when this came out, the 400 started this series, and it was a one pickup, and then soon after they added another model called 450.
Sure.
Which has 2 pickups. But it was intended, of course, to be a student guitar, and it had some really bizarre features.
Okay.
One is, I guess they thought young kids are going to be playing this. So instead of having a strap pin in the upper bout like you would normally have, they made this metal plate with a hole in it designed to use a saxophone strap, which is just a thin strap
Sure.
that has a hook on it.
Sure.
So you were to hook the strap in the hole there from a saxophone strap.
It's so bizarre.
And I've never heard of anybody else doing that with a guitar. And I'm sure the balance probably wasn't great on that idea.
Right.
If you played it for any length of time, there'd be a lot of pressure on you because it is a solid body instrument. So that's one unique thing. And then this back is obviously very bizarre. They, in 56 and 57 on these Tulip Shape models, they have this rough, almost feels like concrete back instead of finishing it and painting it so that it wouldn't slide on your chest. And also was a way to save a little paint, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
But it has a neck through body, and you can see the neck exposed there, the wood.
Comes out at the end
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And it's an alder wood body, so it's not as heavy as it could be with some other heavier woods. And then the pick guard is the anodized gold aluminum, and they kept that for roughly a year and a half and then transitioned to a white plastic pick guard. But the 56s and half of the 57s have the gold.
And it's got a 2 tone selector switch.
Yeah, and you think, why would you have that on a one pickup guitar? But and in addition to having a tone knob, but it gives you a little more variation of tone. And then we've got these bolts that hold the 2 wings onto. You've got this upper bout and this lower bout. We'll call them wings.
Yeah.
And to hold that all together, these were the fasteners that covered the holders for that. That's
Wow.
what that is. So that's, again, you look at that and you think, why does it have these belt buckle chrome circles on here?
Right.
On both sides.
It's basically to bolt the whole thing together.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And this guitar only came in a very few colors. I would say most of them were black. And then they had a Cloverfield green model that they went with, which was kind of an unusual color to be your second color.
Sure.
And there's a few others, I think, that have turned up that have possibly been produced in blonde or some other color, but they were mostly the black and the green.
Anything else you want to say in closing that we didn't cover?
One thing that I thought was fascinating, and I can't confirm it, but when I got it from the dealer, even though it wasn't the kind of combo I was looking for, this guy said, I've never seen one of these in my shop exactly like this, and I knew you were looking for 50s Rickenbackers.
Sure.
I'll take $400 for it. And so he made it like too good to pass up in a way. But he also said that there was a guy that was the original owner that was from Oklahoma, and he was a African-American blues player.
Wow.
And I never knew his name, but I'm pretty sure that his name is represented on the back of this guitar on that saxophone strap. It's got the AA on there.
So, and you guys probably can't see this from the camera's perspective, but I'll try to get a close-up shot.
But I just wondered if that was that guy's name.
But so cool to think that, a blues player in the 50s, African-American blues player from Oklahoma, played this guitar and was the original owner.
That part is true for sure. Yeah.
Is really super cool just for the, American part of the history and the American part of the musical history of this instrument. So
That's
pretty
right.
awesome. Hey folks, so the big question, how does the 1956 Rickenbacker Tulip Shape actually sound? Well, my dad went back down to Kentucky. I had to send the guitar in to have some repair work done, new strings, a neck reset, intonation looked at, etc. Also, I had to master an entire album and promote a separate album, so I'm only all these months later getting back to this. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is like a little video demonstrating just how it would sound under a variety of different circumstances. I'm doing some finger picking, some lead work, and also some rhythm. I'll make mention of that in the various different clips. Also, I tried to keep the guitar super clean because I want you to actually hear the guitar, not like an effect pedal board and etc. Because you can make a guitar sound like a spaceship if you want to, but that's not the point. The point is to kind of hear how it naturally sounds. So I have a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay on there, just natural stuff. But otherwise, it's just the pickup. It's just the way it would sound. Also have a couple of different amp sims on there, but that's just if you're going to run it through an amp. You might want to hear how it sounds through an AC30 or a Marshall stack or a vintage Fender Tweed or whatever you have available, just to kind of give you that in a clean way. So I'm going to go run and change into something more comfortable, adjust the lighting to be a bit more atmospheric. Why don't you grab yourself a beverage of your choosing, and I'll be right back here to make some sweet music on Graham Sparkman Music Production. just a simple man, too shy to preach across this land. Moses struggled with it, I struggle with it too. Romano's got a little tongue-tied, still you promised you'd be right by his side. Moses struggled with it, I struggle with it too. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. It's been so much fun to talk about this 56 400 series Rickenbacker original Tulip Shape with my dad. Thanks to Farron Sparkman for joining me on this episode. Until next time, this is Graham Sparkman with Graham Sparkman Music Production, signing off.
Fickle the fire.